in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Catarina Rivera. She is the public speaker and diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. Catarina, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and do you remember how exactly you answered the question when you were younger? What do you want to be when you grow up?
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm Catarina Rivera. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am a public speaker and DEI consultant focusing on disability inclusion in the workplace. If you were to ask me when I was young what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have told you I wanted to be a naturalist. I was always reading a magazine that was called Ranger Rick, and it told me all about animals and the rainforest. And I had a dream of traveling to Madagascar to study the animals.
I love that. I think it's always interesting to hear kind of what our childhood dreams are as well. And you fast forward to today, how do you think your kind of personal journey has really led you to be in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, consulting for folks, and also being a public speaker?
My journey started with my background. I was born to a Latinx family. My mom is an immigrant from Cuba, and my father is Nuyorican, Puerto Rican from the Bronx. So, growing up with that rich culture and being exposed to family members from different countries, visiting them, getting to know them, speaking Spanish as my first language, all of these things taught me that diversity was valuable. That's a lesson I realize now that I just understood from my family experiences and knowing that it was different than the majority within the US. In addition to my experience with my Latina background, I also had experience with disability from a young age. I was diagnosed with a hearing disability when I was a toddler before kindergarten. It was the late 80s. I was fitted with hearing aids and I was pushed into the oral language world. I had speech therapy and lots of services when I was growing up. And that was the wisdom of the time. I wasn't connected to deaf culture or the deaf community. I wasn't exposed to American Sign Language. That's just the way things were at that time. When I was 17, I found out that I would be losing my vision over time due to a condition called Usher syndrome. And this actually explained why I wore hearing aids. It was a big shock to me, especially because it came at such a great time in my life. I was ready to go to college. I was really excited about the future. And now with my vision disability, I did not know what I could imagine for myself. And that is where I began a new journey with disability, where I was dealing with grief and tragedy of the diagnosis, and also figuring out as a young person, what was my life going to look like? What do I want to do with my career all at the same time? But with the career side of things, I focused on education and I became a bilingual elementary school teacher in the Bronx, giving back to the Latinx community, which was really important to me. And I loved what I was doing. As my career evolved, I developed an interest in public health and food access. Why and how could we get families to have access to healthier food? So that shifted my career towards public health. I earned a graduate degree in that, and I started to work in the nonprofit sector. I also started to do a lot of community-based work, field work, organizing, and focused on food justice. When I was doing all of that, as you know, as I said earlier, I was developing as a person and my disability journey was continuing. When I started, not wanting to talk about it, being very upset, I was able to become more comfortable and get more acceptance for myself in my 20s. I received some services that helped me to navigate the world. I met older people who were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who were disabled, who were blind, and were adapting. So I started to think about my future in a more positive way. When I decided to use a white cane for blindness, that was a pivotal turning moment for me. I was working at a nonprofit in Midtown, commuting, and in the wintertime at night, because it was night at 5 p.m., was very stressful for me. And I didn't want to go through any that kind of stress anymore. So I decided that I really wanted to start using a white cane. And if you talk to blind people, many of them will tell you this is a tough decision. There are many people that don't ever want to use a cane. They would prefer to pass, to do whatever they can to kind of appear that they're not having any struggles. For me, it was the right decision. And for me, it made a big change in my life because I had to become okay with the fact that now everyone looks at me and sees that I'm disabled. There are a lot of stares, there are a lot of eyebrows raised, especially when they see how I navigate the world, because I do have 5% of my vision remaining. So while people hold a stereotype that blindness is always total blindness and you can't see anything and you're not going to be using your phone on the subway or able to look left and right before crossing the street, that's not the reality. So many blind people have remaining vision and we need to use it. So when I started using a cane, I got over the fear of what other people were thinking about me, the concern about what other people were thinking. And that just accelerated my disability journey because I got so much confidence because now I was out there, I was very visible, I was speaking up a lot more about what I needed. The cane that would open up that conversation. And my life got a lot better. Mm-hmm. When I reached this point in my journey, it was amazing. And it wasn't enough for me because I know how many years it took me to get there. And I felt a sense of responsibility to do something with my voice, to make a change for other people, because we're so far behind as a society. And that is what led me to start Blindish Latina on Instagram in 2020. I started this page, I just started sharing my story. And then last year I said, I can turn that into a business. I love public speaking. And that's where everything began. So I changed my life to become an entrepreneur and to do this work with disability inclusion. It's very fulfilling and it really is the next phase for me.
Thank you for sharing your lived experiences and your kind of personal why for getting into this work. I know your background as a teacher, as a consultant, you're teaching leaders and people and companies every day. And in terms of navigating the world and asking for what you need as well, I would love to know how you think about, since we spend a lot of time working at organizations in terms of company culture with a focus on kind of disability, inclusion, and accessibility. How do you think about kind of organizations and how they kind of successfully demonstrate that they are inclusive?
There are so many important ways that companies can be inclusive for disability, and it permeates every function and every area of the company. For example, we can take the employee experience. There are opportunities in hiring to make the process more accessible. Are you offering accommodations within the hiring process? One thing I could suggest to companies is that you decide what supports you can provide to candidates. And instead of asking them to disclose any kind of disability, let them know the supports that are available before an interview and allow them to select what can benefit them. There's no need for them to have to disclose a disability or to disclose something in order to get support. I really believe in designing for inclusion from the beginning and offering that to everyone, because so many people benefit from accessibility beyond who it's designed for. And once you really understand that mindset, And that will just, I think, open up so much about this conversation, because the benefits are truly for every employee. It's also important to remember that anyone can become disabled at any time, whether that's temporarily or permanently. And there are many people with undiagnosed disabilities. So when you create a more supportive environment that will support them, even if they don't necessarily have that diagnosis or name to their experience. Another thing that is really important to think about is the presence of disability within your communications and within your stated policies. Is disability a part of your diversity statement? Is it a part of your commitment? Do you have disabled senior leaders, executive leaders? Is anyone publicly disabled at that level, at the board level? Are you talking about disability when you're planning your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? All of these things are really important, because when it makes people feel seen. And if you're not talking about it, people are thinking you're not thinking about it. The other thing that's important as well is to get more educated on disability overall, because sometimes people really don't know about the full range of disabilities. So when we talk about representation, let's not forget that there are people of all different races who are disabled, all different religions, all different types of disabilities. Oftentimes, we see only a certain type of person represented when we're looking for disability representation. So it's very important to go beyond that, and to also remember that disabilities are not always something that you can see when you look at someone. And you might be interpreting a behavior that is related to a disability in a way that is negative. So for example, oftentimes people think that I'm rude or that I'm ignoring them. And that's their interpretation, because they don't know that I wear hearing aids and I have a limited field of vision. Mm-hmm. So now I'm being viewed negatively as a person. And that can be happening in the workplace.
Absolutely. I think it's the responsibility of an employer and also leaders to make sure there's representation and those non-negotiables for an accessible community. And I think you're right. There's a ton of research that says when you have an inclusive design and you're thinking about folks who are differently abled as well, it's better for everyone. I think the stat is around 3 to 26 million Americans that have a visible or hidden disability. And you mentioned kind of the disability community is the only minority group that anyone can become part of at any point in their life, either permanently or temporarily. And you talked about kind of the stereotypes around kind of blind folks as well. Where do you think we are as a society in destigmatizing talking about accessibility and making work more accessible?
As a society, we're still far behind where we need to be. Unfortunately, we still have many people who do not understand that disabled people are the largest underrepresented group, minority group. I need a better word for it, but we're the largest. And even though reported numbers at a company or an employer are usually, lower than the actual count, those reported numbers are just not accurate. There's so many people that are not disclosing. Only 21% of disabled employees disclose to HR. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that discrimination and prejudice is still very common. We have real stories in the disability community of people not being able to get hired when they disclose their disability or when they don't have a choice. Some people are visibly disabled and they do not have a choice whether or not they can disclose their disability. And when we think even about the conversations that have been happening since the pandemic of who's being impacted. Oh, only the elderly, it's only the disabled people. It's really a reflection of how we are viewed as not worthy and not valuable by society. This idea that the disabled person is not contributing, is not participating, There's a lot of negative stigma and ableism that continues to exist. And it really needs to be dismantled. There are many people that are part of our community, as you stated and as I stated earlier. So I'm hopeful that we will see a change in our lifetime. And I think that disabled voices are very loud. We've been advocating for a long time, and we have new spaces now where we are shining, such as on social media. So my work with corporations, with companies and employers is really to create that motivation to commit to disability inclusion, to bring that awareness. Oftentimes I'm the first speaker on disability that comes in, but I think once that conversation is open, people can start to understand and become more connected to the need.
Mm-hmm. Needing to start the conversation and continue internally as well and make sustainable changes too. Are there any other stigmas that you are still smashing around disability that keep coming up when we're talking to folks?
When we're talking about disability, there's so many stigmas. So one of them is the fact that some people think disability is a bad word. They don't want to say the word disability. We hear a lot of euphemisms. Differently abled is a very common one. And that did not originate from disabled people. It's another way, it's a way of avoiding saying disabled. There's another one called handicapable. And, these are euphemisms. There is a very strong opinion, but remember, disability community, we're not a monolith. There are different perspectives, but in general, I think there's a lot of advocacy around saying the word and that there's nothing wrong with saying the word disability or being disabled. And so I recommend that everyone use either disabled person or person with a disability as the standard language. There are preferences. Mine is identity first, disabled person, but both of those are respectful ways of referring to the community. Another stigma that needs to be smashed is the fact that disabilities are dynamic, that they exist on a spectrum. I hear a lot of stories from people with chronic illnesses that they don't get a lot of understanding about the changing nature of their disability, of their experience. That one day they could have energy, they could be out with their friends, and then another time their symptoms have flared up and it's not possible. So if their friends are then questioning them or viewing them as flaky or a manager, then assigning a negative interpretation to that and not being understanding of the dynamic nature of disability, that can really impact their experience, their well-being, and their career. So we need as much flexibility as possible. And also, just like any other identity, we are whole people with multiple identities. No one's just a member of one group. There's so much intersectionality, and people can even have multiple disabilities as well. So just in terms of like any conversation that's happening, it's so important to consider intersectionality and smash that stigma around disability. Let's talk about it. Let's recognize that disabled people are amazing, are really valuable, and let's improve our inclusion within society, because we're doing a lot of work to adapt to a world that is not designed for us, and it's not fair.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you. No group is a monolith, and also having the conversation, understanding what language people are comfortable with, and also the language that we use matters too in terms of inclusion as well, and being really intentional in terms of kind of that hiring and retaining of disabled employees. What would you want to see organizations really do and truly show their commitment to doing the long-term inclusive work and really make an authentic investment in change management?
Building on what I shared earlier in terms of offering more support within the hiring process, there is a need to definitely create strong disability awareness within an organization at all levels, and to equip managers properly to manage disabled employees, to know how to respond to disability disclosure, to meet people where they are and offer support, but not push support if the person is not ready, and to actually make the accommodations process work for people in a supportive way. The accommodations are the minimum legal standard. They do not equate to inclusion. It's something that you're required to do by law, but that process can often be confusing and challenging for people. Disabled people often are expected to know exactly what the solution is. They may not know. They may just know the challenge that they're facing. And so it's very important for companies to have the understanding themselves of how can they be supportive during the accommodations conversation, and what are the resources that they can rely on. There are many resources out there. The one that I always recommend is askjan.org. They have a hotline anyone can call. You can be a disabled employee, you can be a manager, you can be whoever. You can call them and ask questions to their experts. And they have an online resource where for any disability, they have a list of accommodations that are common for that disability. And I think there needs to be more awareness of the resources that are out there. So in terms of the hiring and retaining process, of course, we need to remove the barriers to hiring. We might need to redesign some aspects of the hiring process, the way people show their expertise and show that they can do the role. And then once hired, there needs to be a pathway to support disabled employees and advancing if they would like to. Oftentimes I see when we talk about the benefits of hiring disabled employees, there is a benefit that I hear a lot, that disabled employees are going to stay longer at the company. My question to that has always been now, well, are they advancing? Right. Because I really am curious about that. And I think it's so important to invest in your employees and enable them to advance if they would like to. So looking at what are the advancement rates for your disabled employees versus other groups, I think is really informative and important to examine. So then we want to see, like I mentioned earlier, disabled leaders at the executive level, at the board level. And the other thing that's super important is to make sure that your organization has an investment in disability inclusion. That's talking about, time, is it in your communications, and also having a budget for the work and investing in measuring your success in this area. All of these things are very important. And when you communicate externally, I want to see images of disabled employees and making sure that's part of your communications. If you're doing anything that faces externally, whether that's social media or a video, you are sending messages about your accessibility. Does your video on your website have closed captions? When you post on social media, do you include an image description? All of that will signal to someone, even just looking at your website or looking at your communication channels, about your commitment and how strong it is to disability inclusion and accessibility.
Absolutely, especially with communication as well, whether you're talking externally, marketing campaigns, internally to employees, everybody, it's important to think about that accessibility. So I do have a question around the measurement piece. Human Rights Campaign has their annual Corporate Equality Index, which has a strict criteria around employers who support and empower LGBTQIA+ employees. B corporations also have a similar kind of criteria for measuring a company's entire social and environmental impact. Do you think there is a benchmark or a rubric for employer accessibility?
Yes, there are a few tools out there that I want to highlight. A really popular tool and well-respected tool is the Disability Equality Index by Disability N in collaboration with the American Associations of People with Disabilities, or AAPD. This is an annual index, and companies that participate, if they score above an 80 out of 100, they are recognized publicly So it is a great opportunity to begin the learning process. Again, that's a Disability Equality Index. There is another tool that exists called the NOD Employment Tracker. That's another option for companies to investigate. And I recently found out about a disability justice audit tool, which I am very excited about. I have not read it all the way through, but I'm very excited about. And I think it's super important to continue to be even more progressive with the way that we're evaluating our progress in this area. This tool is available for free, and I will share that information so that you can hyperlink and share all of these tools with your listeners.
Thank you. I love a good resource share, and I think it's important for accountability too, to see kind of how employers and leaders can take steps to be more accessible, inclusive of disabled employees. I know we were talking about kind of smashing stigmas around disability and what really organizations can do. Do you think that it's an employer's responsibility to really create spaces for vulnerable and hard conversations? Why or why not?
I think it's really important for employers to create psychologically safe spaces and to be able to facilitate safe, transparent conversations, especially when conflicts or tough issues are arising. They should have the skills or seek the skills, the external support in order to work through that. I think that it's really important to also have a plan for if you're having a tough conversation. Why are you having this tough conversation? Because it can open up a lot of unforeseen negative impact if the conversation exposes viewpoints between colleagues that someone didn't know about or causes harm. Where does the intention of opening up the conversation? And I think just being intentional is very important. But when things are going on in the world and that is impacting your employees, and you're not talking about it at all, or you're not creating a space for people who want to talk about it to come together, then I think ultimately you're not indicating that work is a safe place for everyone. And I think that is not going to benefit your employees overall. So just figuring out the right approach is really important.
Yeah, being intentional, really make sure that people are actively cultivating psychological safety is really important. Catarina, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscoring 1 to 2 key takeaways? I know we talked about a lot in terms of your journey to this work, and just kind of best practices for folks as well to start on their journey.
The only other thing I want to share is that July is Disability Pride Month, and I would love to see companies doing more to celebrate this month, to educate themselves about it, and to recognize how important the concept of disability pride is for the community. I found out about this celebration, I believe, 2 years ago, and I have loved it. I have loved seeing the stories of pride and recognizing that I'm at that point where I'm proud of who I am, all the parts of me, including my disability. And it's very empowering. So I think it's a great month to raise awareness about and do something with your employees around.
I think that is a great call to action. July is definitely coming up, and it's a great time to start really having that conversation and continue the conversation for employers around supporting and empowering your disabled employees as well. Catarina, thank you so much for sharing your background and journey and just insights with our audience today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this conversation.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, not AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.